Hello and welcome to Racing News 365 answers your fan questions from last weekend's title deciding Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding and I'm delighted to be joined solely by 2023 Young Journalist of the Year, Sam. Absolutely Coop lead editor Ian Parks is not with us as he is travelling home from Abu Dhabi, of course, because for those who watch the F1 updates will know he was at the circuit to see Lando Norris crowned the 2025 Formula One World Champion. I say crowned, he doesn't actually get the trophy until Friday's FIA Gala Awards evening over in Uzbekistan, so Lando's got a trip to make after winning the title. And Sam, it's crazy, isn't it? 24 races, the title decided between three drivers, and here we are now talking about a new world champion.
I know, and also it came down to just 2 points, which whilst in terms of actual points isn't the closest ever world championship. That was 1984 when Niki Lauda beat his McLaren teammate Alain Prost by just half a point. It is, in percentage terms, the closest championship ever when you lay out all the points across the year. And that just shows how razor thin the margins were when all was said and done this year. So yeah, an amazing season. So many different brilliant narratives to pick apart. You know, it was far closer than it really kind of needed to be, or we expect it would be, at least from a driver outside the McLaren pool. I think we all realised it was going to go down to the wire between Oscar and Lando. Well, there was a point at the year where we definitely thought Oscar had it wrapped up, but again, shows another unpredictable narrative from the year. So yeah, it's been brilliant. It wasn't quite the year we anticipated. Obviously, heading into the season, we thought that we'd have Mercedes and Ferrari in the mix. There was talks of, this all-time classic F1 season. It was still a very strong season, but it wasn't quite that. But yeah, lots to discuss, lots to break down and delve into.
It's remarkable that despite everything that's happened this season, it was still the bookies' favourite at the start of the year. Lando, who's won the title. Funny how things work out. The bookies maybe do know something. Who would have thought that? We, as always, have had so many amazing questions sent in by fans, so thank you very much. We have randomly selected 5, as we always do, for this fan questions video. And the first one, and they're all very much themed around, obviously, the McLaren, Lando, Oscar, Max. And the first one comes from Gail. Why did Yuki Tsunoda get a penalty, but not Lando Norris? Of course, this surrounds the incident following Lando's first pit stop, where he fell behind Yuki Tsunoda, who was yet to pit. Lando overtook Yuki between turns 5 and turn 6 on the long main straight, but did so off the circuit. Interestingly, both drivers were investigated. Yuki for forcing Lando off the track, and he was penalised, a 5-second time penalty and 1 penalty point. Lando, it was decided that no action was needed. Yes, okay, even if Lando was penalised, he did finish 7 seconds ahead of Charles Leclerc, but given that Lando did 2 pit stops, he would have had to have served a penalty prior to that second pit stop. It's an interesting one, Sam, isn't it?
It is very interesting, and it's proven quite contentious and divisive online because they, as you say, they were both investigated. Yuki, of course, was deemed to have been weaving or moving multiple times, trying to break the slipstream, which some people have argued is allowed within the rules. However, the stewards felt on Yuki's part that he had made multiple moves, and that, so I'm just reading the actual steward's document, and I don't have my glasses on, so I do apologise, that he made multiple changes of direction, which ultimately resulted in Lando Norris having to go off track to avoid a collision. So that's why Yuki was given his 5-second penalty, and obviously this incident was all together, all at once, so the fates of those two incidents were very much intertwined. Some felt that they both should have been penalised, some may have argued that neither should be. But ultimately, the stewards felt that Yuki was responsible for that and that Lando shouldn't be given a penalty. And the reasoning that they gave for Lando not to be handed a punishment is that he essentially, had Yuki not made those moves, Lando would not have had to go off track in order to make the overtake, and that he was coming through anyway, and that he would have made that pass had it not been, regardless of whether Yuki tried to defend or not, because he had a quicker car on fresher tyres, and that it was almost inevitable. So that's why they ultimately decided not to penalise him for that. And as such, it didn't count as a track limit warning because it was deemed a response to how Yuki was driving. And yeah, as I said at the top of the answer, proven slightly controversial online. Some people aren't particularly happy. Some people have analysed it and broken it down and tried to prove the stewards wrong. But this is ultimately where the stewards did, end up with their decision. And it is also worth saying that even had Lando been given that 5-second penalty, and you could argue that Charles would have then closed within 5 seconds. He would have shown more pace later in the race. That could have dropped Lando to 4th, and that would have handed the title to Max. You've got to remember as well that McLaren could have dropped Oscar behind Lando and used Oscar to back up Charles in the latter stages, giving Lando enough of a buffer to finish on the podium. So realistically, it wasn't a decisive decision by the stewards in the overall outcome of the championship.
And that's the good point, isn't it? Is that, even if Lando was penalised, if McLaren left him on track, then of course he was still 7 seconds ahead of Leclerc. And even if Leclerc had gotten past, they would have likely just gotten Oscar to slow down, let Lando by, and Lando would have still finished in 3rd. So penalty or no penalty, it didn't really ultimately have a factor on the championship, at least in our opinions. And obviously, if you disagree, please do let us know in the comments. We do check them. Of course, we are always up for some good debate. Next question, and a really interesting one, comes from Samantha. Who will be more hurt by not winning the title, Max Verstappen or Oscar Piastri? I'll let you have a minute to think, Sam. For me, I think Oscar. Reason being is you look at the way the season's gone, and yes, Max just short by 2 points, agonisingly close to the record equaling 5th consecutive title. But you look at the way the year's gone, and for the first half of it, Red Bull did not have a particularly good car. Yes, in some venues like Suzuka, for example, it was immaculate. But actually, for a lot of the year, Max hasn't had a package where he can compete with the McLarens. The one, you look at Hungary, that was purely just bad pace by Red Bull that weekend. Austria, of course, Max was taken out by Kimi. There are other instances. Barcelona, of course, yes, people have brought that one up, but ultimately there are more than just that one reason outside of Max's control why, he fell so many points adrift. You look at Oscar, on the other hand, Australia followed Lando off track, of course, when the rain fell. It was then Oscar who spun, ultimately, not Lando. That cost him a huge amount of points. Yes, you also have, of course, things like Monza, Singapore, outside of Oscar's control. But what was inside Oscar's control was him having the bad weekends at the low grip circuits, him crashing twice in Baku. Had one or two of those things not happened, there's a good chance Oscar would have sealed this title, probably back in Qatar. And there are more things that he has done himself rather than outside factors, which saw him fall adrift of Lando. So for me, I think out of the two, it's Oscar who probably will feel more hurt and feel more like there's an opportunity lost here in losing the title. Your thoughts?
I very much echo what you said there about Oscar. It was within his grasp. It felt very much within his control up until he had that complete kind of slide of form, which may or may not have been precipitated by what happened at Monza. And then that kind of, triggered, that was a trigger that then kind of, ended up affecting his Azerbaijan weekend, and then so on and so forth. He had the low grip circuits that obviously he then struggled at in Austin and Mexico, and it just kind of all just fell away and fell apart for him in so many ways. I think whilst he'll be hurt, I think he still will be able to look at it from a kind of level and objective perspective. He said after the race, it's still Lando Norris. He's not Superman now. This hasn't magically transformed him. I will have other opportunities. There will be more seasons to come. He is 24 after all. He's got at least another decade probably in F1. He's got plenty of time to make up for the ground he may have lost over the second part of this season. But it is absolutely Oscar who'll be the more hurt one. And in fact, Max a few weekends ago said, and I quote, "No, I'll still go on holiday if he loses the title. I'm pretty good at putting things into perspective and letting things go. I'm not going to cry about it." So that Max is totally kind of viewing this season as glass half full. He's looking at it from a positive perspective of, I had this unexpected championship charge, this title challenge out of nowhere that we just did not anticipate over the summer. So I'm seeing the positives of that. I'm looking at the turnaround, the ground we clawed back against McLaren, not the ground that we had initially seeded earlier in the year. And some of those mistakes were made, before Laurent Mekies came in, seemingly, helped turn the team around. and then what Max was able to achieve in the second half of the year, which was superb, on the podium in every post-summer event. And how many wins was it? 6 wins out of those final 10 races or 9 races. So yeah, an amazing run of form. So Max is very much the lesser hurt by this, and he'll be able to shake it off. But I guess that's the benefit of already having 4 titles to your name.
Still going to be very weird not seeing Max with the number 1. Will he take the 3? The 33 only time will tell. Next question comes from Manoj. Should Max have pitted again when he had the pit window over Piastri in a bid to hold the pack up? Of course, again, a really interesting one, because Oscar, of course, did a long first stint, then pitted. Max regained the lead. Interestingly, following Oscar's pit stop for a good couple of laps, Max had a big enough advantage where if he were to have pitted for a second time, obviously hoping Red Bull to an average to good pit stop, he would have still re-emerged back onto the track in the lead, probably a couple of seconds ahead of Piastri. Ultimately, Red Bull decided not to pit again and Max won quite comfortably. But it is an interesting one, isn't it, Sam? Because, had Max done it, then perhaps it could have opened the door to trying at that point to hold the pack up. But actually, as Max and Red Bull have pointed out themselves following the Grand Prix, the main reason why Max then couldn't hold the pack up was actually due to what were quite clever, a very clever strategy by McLaren.
It was a very clever strategy indeed. In fact, that is exactly what Laurent Mekies called it in his post-race debrief. He admitted that the team were caught off guard. They weren't expecting McLaren to split their strategies in that way. And obviously, as you say, Oscar being on the hard tyre, running longer into the race, pushed Max into having to run a normal first stint and not backing the pack up, because obviously that wouldn't have worked. He would have ceded ground to Oscar when the pit stop phase eventually came, and so it wasn't an option earlier on. As for why he didn't then do it later by taking a second stop and then backing into the field, Laurent Mekies said as well that it was a possibility. It was something that they discussed, but ultimately they stuck to their plan because they didn't feel it was the right option for them. They would have given up a large advantage, and they didn't think that playing tactics would have given them the edge. And so that is ultimately why they decided on concentrating on their race and winning their race, because they felt that they can't control things that happen behind them. And so that's ultimately why Red Bull decided against pitting Max for a second time, even though it took away that final kind of roll of the dice or joker card that they may have had in their pocket to try and change the outcome of the race.
Of course, if you are enjoying this video, please be sure to smash the like button and subscribe to the channel. Next question comes from Hassan, and I'm loving these questions for this video. Did McLaren's team orders in Monza win Norris the title? Of course. This is in reference to McLaren's McLaren's bad pit stop for Lando, which resulted in Oscar going ahead of his teammate. When Lando rejoined the circuit, the team instructed Oscar to give the spot, P2 in this case, back to Lando. And it's a really interesting one because at the time in the podcast and the F1 updates with Ian and I, we were discussing whether that incident would win Lando the title over Oscar. Actually, when you look at it now, though that decision by McLaren was crucial because it's won the title for Lando over Max. Who would have thought that'd be the case? But yes, again, there are other incidents and moments this year which have allowed Lando to win the title over Max and Oscar. But that one in particular, it's quite interesting and funny, isn't it? How we were looking at that as, will that win Lando the title over Oscar when actually it's won it over Max instead?
What's fascinating about this incident, also, there's the fact that McLaren were merely trying to, at the time, right the wrong of having pitted Oscar first, who was behind. They'd played with the norms of an F1 race when you have two drivers who are running close together, and that is you always give the driver who's ahead the priority in a pit stop, and trying to play the team game, trying to kind of see off any lingering, lasting threat to the Constructors' Championship, and let's face it, it was pretty much wrapped up. They decided, in order to cover off, I think it may have been Charles Leclerc behind Oscar, that he would pit first and then Lando would go second. And there's some issues with the McLaren hardware in the pit stops that when they go simultaneous stops, often the second stop is slow. They have issues. And that is then what befell Lando, and that's how he ended up behind Oscar. So that's why they felt the need to do what they did. And yes, those 3 points were critical in many ways to the championship, obviously finishing 2 points ahead of Max. But something that we spoke about a lot after the race, and was going to mention in our chat, was that very incident changed the complete course, the complete nature of the championship fight from there on out, because that was that destabilizing force for Oscar. That's when it all started to kind of unravel for him, and he admitted as much later on that he was still thinking about that when it came to Azerbaijan, and that is ultimately what led to his difficult weekend there and how many points he lost there. So in many ways, you can't rerun the championship with McLaren not making that swap. It's impossible to know how things would have shaken out. But there is a strong argument you can make that Oscar wouldn't have capitulated in the way that he did had that not happened. And if they hadn't, you can kind of pose a question, would Oscar have ultimately prevailed and won this championship? So these fine margins in which an F1 season is fought on, this one thing could have been a huge turning point. So yeah, there's a lot you can kind of unpick from it. But yeah, a fascinating question. So thank you very much.
The final one comes from Thomas. Has Yuki Tsunoda's struggles proven Sergio Perez was better than people thought? And I guess it's a perfectly timed question following Abu Dhabi, because I guess initially when Yuki got the radio message from Red Bull to do your best, try and hold Lando up a bit, it was so reminiscent to what Checo received in 2021 against Lewis Hamilton. As we know, Checo did the most immense of jobs to allow Max to almost, close almost directly onto the back of Lewis. I guess there was initial feelings of, is Yuki going to do the same against Lando? Obviously, it wasn't the case. In the end, Yuki got a penalty. But it has proven, I think, a little bit that for everything Yuki's gone through this year, and even Liam Lawson for the opening couple of rounds, Sergio Perez, whilst of course he did spiral quite dramatically, particularly in the second half of 2024, when you look at 2021, 2022, even the start of 2023, Checo was, dare I say it, a near perfect number 2 for Red Bull, because for several occasions you could guarantee that while he wouldn't be challenging for a podium, he would be there in the top 5. Because as we discussed in the podcast, had Yuki, being nearer the front, as he was for the sprint in Qatar, and we saw how he helped Max on the first lap of that, if Red Bull had its second driver closer to Max, would have made such a difference against 2 McLarens.
Completely. And actually, even the start of, I think it was 2024, in the opening 5 rounds, Red Bull had 4-1-2s. So he was able to bring that level of performance when he needed to. And you're absolutely right. He spiraled, it fell away as that car was further developed in Max's image. And that's something we talked about on the podcast, and something that will be a potential difficulty for Isaac Hadjar next year. When that car starts to get, kind of tinkered and played with from the base that it starts from. So yeah, it's a very good question, because you can compare kind of directly the defensive assignment given in Abu Dhabi for both Sergio Perez in 2021 and Yuki Tsunoda, and Sergio Perez was far more effective. Yuki Tsunoda, bless him, and this was, I think, wrong, or not a just appraisal of the situation. Martin Brundle, when Yuki was holding up Lando, he called it borderline on sportsmanship. I think it was something to that effect, which I thought, well, no, he's doing his job. Like, he is there to back him up into, there's nothing on, it's gamesmanship, yes, but that's what he's been told to do. He's playing the team game, and it wasn't as effective. Lando was always going to get past, and obviously he ended up, copying a 5-second time penalty in the process of doing that. But yeah, points wise, results wise, everything history shows that we were perhaps harsh on Sergio Perez. And in fact, there was a Twitter account called F1 Troll who tweeted, and I'm not a superhero fan, so I know it's from a Marvel film, but I think he's called Thanos, the guy with the rings.
Yes.
There's a quote where he says, "Perhaps I treated you too harshly." And there's this meme, and it's got Sergio Perez's face on the other side of it. And Sergio Perez quote tweeted this yesterday, saying, perhaps with a crying, laughing emoji face, which is just wonderful that he is in touch with that kind of discourse and debate online. But he still ultimately he didn't perform where Red Bull needed to. They had to make that change. I don't think how much Liam and now Yuki have struggled unvalidates Red Bull's decision at the time. They had to make that move. But moving into 2026, what will be fascinating to see and fantastic, as you kind of pointed out, with Sergio Perez being a near perfect number 2, is alongside Valtteri Bottas at Cadillac, we get the battle of the number 2 drivers. So we'll finally be able to see which one will come out on top, obviously from the time when Valtteri was alongside Lewis at Mercedes.
I will correct you because Thanos was not wearing rings. He was wearing infinity stones. How dare you get that so wrong?
I'm not a superhero Marvel fan, so I apologise to all of you.
The point still stood. For those who have watched this fan questions video, please be sure to smash the like button and subscribe to the channel. Comment below your thoughts on any of the questions we've answered, and also if you've got any questions genuinely from the entire season, please do comment them below at some point over the next couple of weeks. We will do an end of season fan questions video because I imagine you guys have got a fair few that you would like to be answered. For myself and Sam, we will see you next time. See you later.
Thanks for joining us as always.